Okay. Okie doke. Hi everyone. I'm going to be talking about my favorite reads of 2019. So, when I was coming up with this list, I had a lot of 5-star reads from this year. But it just so happened that when I came up with this list, I had 5 fiction and 5 nonfiction books on that top 10. So, that's pretty cool. Kind of goes to show how much nonfiction I've been reading, I guess, and how much I've been enjoying them. So I have 6 physical copies here. I have one other book that I've lent to a friend and 3 that I listened to on audiobook. But these are the 6 I have here. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to talk about all of my favorites. Starting with The Reckonings by Lacey M. Johnson. So this was a book that I wasn't sure was going to be on my favorites list when I read it. I kind of thought that I would be, that I would forget some of the essays that are in this. So this is a collection of essays mostly about the author's, life in Houston, but through environmental and ecological lenses, and then also about waste. And there's an essay all about a landfill. There's an essay about the floods in her city of Houston. When I first read it, it was emotional and it impacted me and everything. All of these essays, but sometimes with essays and short stories, I tend to forget most of them. But this one I just remembered, and I remember a lot of the essays in it, and they really stuck with me in a way that I wasn't expecting. So this is The Reckonings by Lacey M. Johnson. So this next book is Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. So I read this and I finished it on either New Year's Eve or the day before. So this was a very end of the year. I picked it up in right after Christmas at a bookstore because it was on a lot of best of lists, and I like her writing and I like her vibe and style. I read some of her middle grade or young adult novels when I was a young adult, when I was a teen. But so this is a very short, I think it's under 200 pages. Yeah, it's under 200 pages. It's about this family dealing with the daughter who gets pregnant as a teenager. But it follows the mother of her daughter and the grandparents of that daughter. And it messes around in time, messes around in revealing things at different points and mirroring her life and her daughter's life. But it's very quick. I love how it's written. It definitely stuck with me and was intense, but yeah, I just had to include it even though I just read it. I think it's gonna stick with me for time to come because I love the style. It also weirdly part of it takes place at the college I went to, so that was just a little extra tidbit of connection there. So Red at the Bone would highly recommend. So the next book is Good Talk, a memoir and conversation by Myra Jacob. So I read this a while ago and I've been yearning to reread it, but I had borrowed it, and so I didn't have it to reread, and then my girlfriend got it for Christmas, so I'm perfect, now I can reread it. But so this is a graphic memoir in a really cool style with these cut out black and white people, and it's basically a conversation between the author and her son for parts of it, and the author just talking about her life. It's about identity and race, living in America, and basically America right now and in the past few years, but also about how kids interpret all of what's happening, and how they're impacted by like the way that adults act around them, and like basically the astute observations that her son makes. Yeah, so would highly recommend. So this next book I read because there's this list of I think it's the ultimate best books of this year or whatever year it is. It does something I love where it like tallies up how many times a book is in a best of the year list from all of these different sources. So it's kind of the best of lists. And so like the top book is the one that's been on the most lists, and then they like tell you how many lists it's been on, and then they tally down until the ones that have been on like 5 or fewer lists. There's like a lot of them. So I guess scientifically, statistically, this might be the best book of last year or one of the best books of last year. So that is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. I don't know the pronunciation, so sorry if that's wrong. So this was on that list of the best of books, and so I picked it up mostly because of that, and also because I was intrigued. It was also being hailed as like the big millennial novel, like kind of expressing like this, I don't know. Let me get to what it's about. It's about a young 20-something, mid-20s woman in the 90s, no, in 2000 exactly, who her goal is to sleep for a year, I think, or sleep for as long as possible. So she starts taking all these drugs, and like she has like one friend who's like checking in on her somewhat often, but she's just like not really a good person most of the time, or like any of the time. She's just like not great as a human. Like her decisions and how she treats other people is bad, but it's just like it was just very interesting, and it was like, I don't know, reading it was like a haze around me. Like it was just very like, I don't know, all consuming. So I really enjoyed it. This is probably not everyone's cup of tea. It reminded me, I just read The New Me over the summer, and I'm reading You Too Can Have a Body Like Mine, I think it's called, and those are all like main character female 20-somethings living in this like millennial life, so-called millennial like apartment, and renting and having a dead-end job that you don't really care about and all of this stuff. But this has been my favorite of that kind of book so far, so would highly recommend. And then my next favorite book is Long Live the Tribe of Fatherless Girls by T. Kira Madden. This is a memoir, so it's about her growing up in Boca Raton, Florida. I think that's how it's pronounced, Boca Raton. And it's about, her dad was in part of like the Steve Madden brand family. I don't remember if he's actually Steve. I don't think he is. But so there's like, and then her mom, like, it's basically about her growing up, being biracial, being like very wealthy, struggles that she went through, the drugs and like the alcohol in like her life that all of the adults were consuming when she was a kid, and then as she grew up she also did. It's also about her like coming to terms with her queerness and what she actually likes in, I guess, partners, sexual or otherwise. But this just read really well. Like this read really smoothly. I like could probably read the whole thing in one sitting if I had enough time. So it was really impactful and one of my favorite memoirs of the year. So speaking of memoirs, one of my other favorite books of the year was Heavy by Kesey Lehman. I believe that's the pronunciation. So this is another memoir. It is mostly about him growing up with his mom, and his mom's like a professor, and so like there are ways in which he has this upbringing that's very like connected to higher ed and connected to all of these like ideas, and there's also this flip side of it where they're like struggling money wise and she's abusive and that, so like there's like these different things going on, and so it's about him growing up. There's a lot of talk about his body, his mom's body being big all of his life or most of his life, and all of that. So it was very intense. I listened to it. It was very well read. I think he read it. Not totally sure. But I would highly recommend it. I saw it on a couple other people's favorite lists, but it was truly like so intense and impactful. So I would highly recommend that. So another book that I listened to was Florida, which is a collection of stories by Lauren Groff. So all of these stories, obviously, they're set in Florida, and they're kind of about Florida in different ways. And one reoccurring story or character, I guess, is this woman who's not from Florida originally, who moved down there for her husband, and she's living with her sons, and her sons are like growing up in Florida, and it's like her adjusting to all of this and like kind of from a like outsider point of view. But there's all these different stories in there, kind of a mix of like people whose lives are like falling apart, and a mix of like what Florida feels like in different ways, and like how like wilderness, like Florida wilderness, which is like swamps, like are taking back over land. So I just thought it was really interesting, and I love a good book about Florida, or that has a very like specific like tone and feel, and like a really great sense of place. And I found that was really good, and I really like the narrator for this book too. Yeah, so again, I don't always love essays or short story collections, but I love to read them in case I either find one story or essay that I like, or if they actually stick with me for longer than I anticipate. So that was a favorite of the year. So another book that I actually have the physical copy to, but I don't have here because I lent it to a friend, is The Book of X, and that's by Sarah Rose Etter. So this is, I don't know, for people who like kind of creepy, surrealist fiction. It's about this young girl who is born with a knot in her stomach, or her literal like midsection is a knot. Her and her mom, and I think her grandma, all have it. And her family owns a meat like farm, like meat cave. Like they go into this cavern and they hack away at the walls, and the walls are made of meat. And she eventually like goes to a city to work this like desk job and get away from her family and get away from her life after some violence. And so she like gets away, but then she like tries to cure herself, like cure the condition with some doctors. So it's just very intense, and like the symbolism is there in terms of like trauma being passed down like from female lines generation to generation. The imagery was like vivid. It was overall just very intense, but it was also like a pretty quick read, and you could really flow through it. But for people who liked Her Body and Other Parties, this would be like a really great book for you guys to read. So it was also by a smaller, I guess, press or publishing company, $2 Radio, which is, they're based in Columbus, and they're like small family owned. But I found it really, really powerful. And so now this brings us to my two favorite books of the year, one fiction and one nonfiction. So my favorite fiction book, I again listened to on audiobook, and that was Circe, and that's by Madeline Miller. I almost said Marilyn Miller. That's by Madeline Miller. So this book has been talked about enough. Like, people love it. People know that it's out there and people know that it's good. But I listened to it and I don't know if it's getting enough like buzz about how great the audiobook is. It was just like very like, again, I'm gonna say powerful. I said this like a million times in this video, but like powerful and like has such an interesting interpretation of what is like kind of this like minor character in the Odyssey and in that mythology, and taking her and making her a person and making her have all of these like feelings and thoughts and her life and what that life looks like for like this kind of immortal witch that she is. But I would highly recommend reading it. It's going to be intense, so be prepared if you're reading it while driving or something. There were definitely some points that I like had to like refocus on the road while I was listening to it because it just got very intense very quickly. But I really enjoyed it. I also read A Song of Achilles this year, and I think I like Circe more, but they were both great, so would highly recommend. And would highly recommend the audiobook specifically. So this brings me to the last book of my 10 favorite books, and that is my favorite nonfiction book. And if I had to pick a favorite book of the year, it would also be this book, and that is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. So this has been on so many best of lists, like people should know about it, but just in case you don't, it's a memoir about the author in a abusive same-sex relationship while she's in grad school, and they move in together to this dream house in this college town in the Midwest, and it's just very well done. The style of it is like each page or couple pages is its own like take on the dream house. So it's kind of like thinking through this idea and this abuse in like a lot of different ways. It was just really tremendous. I read it super quick, so I want to read it again, but truly just one of the best books of the year and maybe decade for me. So this is definitely my favorite book of the year. So those were my favorite books of the year. I'm going to have another video coming up with my overall reading stats and my 2020 goals. So look out for that. See ya.